This is to demonstrate how all human decisions and actions are damaging us socially, economically, and environmentally. So our decisions are affecting our human values, our livelihoods, and our life supporting environment. We all have 3 or 4 universal reasons or contexts for all our human actions. We all reduce our actions or develop our policies to meet our needs, our desires, or to address our problems. So this is an individual making a decision. Individual, I need food. What is the action of most individuals? I'm talking about city-based individuals. We go to a supermarket and buy bread, cereal, vegetables, fruit, meat. Some very common decisions that we make. What are the potential consequences of those decisions? 90% of the population don't think about those. So what it is mostly supporting mainstream agriculture, which is killing our soil and poisoning our land, rivers, and food. Economic, social, and environmental disaster globally. So when we buy a loaf of bread, where has it come from? How is it produced? The wheat that's been grown for it, how is that being produced? Is it mass produced? Is it sprayed with pesticides? Those pesticides sink into the soil, go into our rivers, affecting communities. So it's affecting us socially, economically, it's affecting our cultures. Exactly the same with cereal. Vegetables and fruit, the same thing. What have they been sprayed with? Have they been grown looking after the soil or destroying the soil? Exactly the same with our meat products. Has the livestock been grown up in barbaric, cruel factory farms, which causes huge environmental damage? Or have the animals been raised humanely and regeneratively, healing the land? How is your food being produced? How has it got to that supermarket? And what are the effects, not just immediately, but what if your bread or cereal has come from another country? How's it affecting the land in that country? So you can see that just one person making a few daily decisions, the way all humans make decisions, can lead to unintended knock-on consequences further down the line where we don't see it or think about it. So now think of this on a government level, from a whole country. So a government objective, the people need food. So we've gone from an individual, I need food, to a government, people need food. So the Ministry of Agriculture will say the people need food, and the action will be mass produce food as fast and as cheaply as possible. We just need people to have food. There's no further thought than that. And the problem with thinking like that is now what we're seeing globally is inhumane, environmentally lethal industrial food production, and as an agricultural policy that promotes chemicals and the corporate marketing of oil and technology, economic, social, environmental disaster globally. So our agriculture globally, because governments develop policies like this with no further thought to knock-on consequences, we now globally have an agriculture that produces 20 times more dead, eroding soil than food per person per year. That should terrify us all. And you can see the knock-on effects of this kind of agriculture on our Ministry of Environment, our Ministry of Social Welfare, our Ministry of Finance. So we cannot have ministries or individuals making decisions to such a narrow context as our needs, our desires, or to address problems. We have to have a much more profound context than that to stop these kind of decisions coming about with no further thought than that. So this is what it would look like if we were now developing a new holistic context for all our future human actions. So a holistic context is a profound description of how you want your life to be, what behaviors would bring that life about, all tied to the health of our life-supporting environment, because nothing can survive without green plants growing on regenerating soils. So none of us can survive without our environment being healthy. So the first thing we do in holistic management is develop our own holistic context within which the health of our environment is paramount. So let's take those same decisions as before and now make them within a holistic framework. So the individual would come along and say, I need food. And the action would not just be to go to the supermarket and buy food. It would be check that my food choices are in line with my holistic context. So if I go into a supermarket and I buy bread and I say, okay, where has it been grown? Is it regenerative? Has the wheat been sprayed with poisons? If they have, it's definitely not leading to the health of my life-supporting environment. It's destroying my environment. So all those things that I discussed just now, if they're not in line with this context, which most of those won't be these days, you need to start sourcing food from somewhere else. For example, I buy all my food now from local people that are growing regenerative vegetables, fruits, and things like that. And all my meat is holistically raised livestock. I do not touch any animal products that come from damaging inhumane factory farms, or that have been fed stock feed or any of these things. So you'd automatically start looking for better decisions. And the consequences is people will be supporting farmers who promote soil health by using holistic decision making with regenerative tools and practices. So now let's look at that on a government scale with our whole country doing this. Same decision as before. The government say people need food. Now you have nobody thinking in their boxes, they're thinking much bigger. So your Ministry of Agriculture would now also be working with Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Social Welfare, because what would happen with a national holistic context is all ministries would be developing their policies towards this context. So your Ministry of Agriculture would come along and say, okay, well, let's check that all our agricultural policy suggestions are in line with the national holistic context and are simultaneously socially, culturally, economically, and environmentally sound. So none of that previous industrial agricultural policy would pass any of these checks. And in holistic management, we have 7 context checks to make sure that the action is sound. And the consequence of thinking within this more profound context, instead of basing our decisions on needs or wants or problems, is the consequence of this with the government, a new agricultural policy that promotes soil health and regenerative tools and practices and humane treatment of all animals. So can you see how a very profound but simple change in the context in which we make decisions would change our world? So it starts with you, the individual. What kind of life do we want? Do we want a life leading to bare ground, poverty, drought, floods, conflict? Or do we want to be making decisions within a holistic context which takes us out of conflict and towards a regenerative future?